To build a proactive culture, we've got to work on providing an honest appraisal. You don't want people functioning on misinformation and rumour and social aggravation building. You want people having the right information from the horse's mouth. Providing an accurate appraisal. Don't give people platitudes in place of honest information. And give people a clear role in producing change. JFK did this really successfully. In his short presidency, one of the things he did do was allay the fears of a very, almost paranoid America. In his inaugural speech, he faced an America that was fearful of Soviet expansionism, fearful of the communist threat within in the McCarthyist fashion. And he was able to steer those fears, able to allay those fears, distract people from their fears by giving them a thing called the Peace Corps. By declaring, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And then giving them the strategic possibility to produce the kind of change he and they wanted to see. Articulate leadership is opening up decision making. I learned this the hard way because I lived in Copenhagen, Denmark for 10 years. And their approach to leadership is, shall we say, somewhat different to ours. They have a tribal approach, which means consensus building on everything. So if we want to make a decision on the shape of the coffee room in our office building, we have to build consensus over a period of weeks or sometimes even months just to get to the point where we know what kind of seats we'll have in the coffee room. And that can be very slow, of course, in steering a company through a difficult time. But the one advantage is when people help make the decision, they're much more loyal to it. They have that sense of ownership. This gentleman here, Sir John Hegarty, owns one of the biggest advertising companies in Britain, BBH Advertising. It's not a small business. It's quite a large business. Last year, he faced in recession the need to cut expenditure by a large amount. And rather than making heavy cuts in just one field, one area of the company, he decided to offer everybody a few days extra holiday in response or in exchange for a 3.5% pay cut. But here's the clincher. He said, we're not doing anything unless everybody, that is everybody, is on board with the decision. Amazing thing was, even though for the guy at the bottom of the pay ladder, 3.5% meant a lot more than it did for Sir John Hegarty, everybody agreed. Everybody signed on. And as a result, people have remained incredibly loyal to that decision. Now, I know and you know that a lot of leadership is unilateral. You have to make decisions quickly. You don't have always the time to build consensus. But even then, you can explain the decision. You can explain it in ways people can understand. You can open up and empathize with those who are affected. Did you see this guy land his plane on the Hudson River? Anybody? January 2009. Aren't you glad you weren't on that flight? LaGuardia Airport was the aim, but for reasons beyond Captain Sullenberger's control, they ended up on the Hudson River, an emergency procedure. And because of his quick thinking and skill, he saved 155 passengers and crew. And pilots around the world lauded this man for his incredible ability. And reporters asked him, how did you do this? This is so rare. He said, well, I've done it 10,000 times in a simulator. I've mapped out the worst case scenario 10,000 times. Sometimes being articulate just means exactly that. Mapping out the worst possible phone call you could get tomorrow. The worst possible eventuality could happen in your project next month. What would you do next if that happened? What could you do now to head that off so it doesn't happen? Explore that possibility with your team. It's surprising how creative people get when it comes to mapping out the future. And it's surprising what it does to this sense of confidence in facing the future. We're still talking about being proactive here. Twitterize your communication. Some of us are writing Tolstoy-like War and Peace treatises, 5 paragraphs long, for people who are reading them on screens that take no more than 40 words. We need to Twitterize our communications. Get to the point, stay on it. If you've got 1 or 5 points to make one only. If you've got 5 reasons to support your argument, find one only, the strongest. Leave out anything that's written in the heat of emotion. I told them on the 5th floor this wouldn't work. Do they listen to me? Leave it out. In the digital world, it'll come back to bite you anyway. Twitterize you, and always add some encouragement. Such a simple thing. They say that encouragement is the breakfast of champions. I actually think it's the breakfast, lunch and dinner of people that really do well in life, in any field. In tough times and times of change, for many leaders, we think that passion doesn't count. Feelings don't matter. What matters is metrics, numbers, pie charts, PowerPoint presentations. What matters most in tough times is feeling. Whenever you stand before your team, the dominant message they receive is your conviction, even if you're not conscious that you have any. It was not terrorists that grounded and almost bankrupted American Airlines, several American airlines, post 9/11. It was human emotion that did that. It was not terrorists that caused architects to have to think again about how they redesigned tall buildings in America. It was human emotion that did that. Without emotion, there's no change. If you're an educator, you know this. Without a passion, there is no learning. You call it Hebbian learning. People learn better when what they're learning connects with the emotional circuitry of their brains. People learn better when they're having a good time. So passion is not to be hidden in a time like this. It's to be remodeled and reshaped. And we do that with what I call the 80-20 rule, but some people who are more sophisticated than me call it the principle of factor sparsity. Some people call it the Pareto Principle. If you know anything about the study of statistics, you know this man, Victor Pareto, who in the beginning of the last century discovered that, first of all, 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of its landholders. And over a period of years, he began to observe the same relative ratio occurring in other areas. For example, in retail, it still holds largely true today. 80% of sales come from 20% customers. In industry, it's much the same. In community groups, 80% of the work will be done by 20% of the volunteers. But I think it has an application for me personally. I don't know your situation, and you can always tell me in the break if you think I'm wrong. But for me, anyway, oftentimes 80% of my effectiveness comes from things that take me 20% of my time, my energy, and my skill. Because these are the areas where I am naturally motivated, naturally passionate, naturally gifted. Do you know there are 5 books on leadership released every single day in the UK? Every day there are 5 more books you could read about being a leader, like we need to read another 5 a day. And almost every one of them will have a chapter, a section on balance. And I know what they mean, but you know, most of the great leaders I've interviewed over the years for television and talked to in person, they're not balanced at all. Some of them are just plain odd. They're eccentric. They're not the sort of person I would naturally take to a party with me for fear they might do something. Some of them are very unbalanced people. I'm talking about the really great leaders of our time. But they know they're unbalanced. And they're willing to complement their unbalance with other people's talent and ability. And the reason they're successful is they have spent their time doing the 20% and leaving the 80% to someone else. Now, you can't always tell your own 20%. At least I've had to find others who can hold up the mirror for me. People I trust to help me find my 20%. But, you know, it's a challenge for me too with my team to hold up the mirror for them. To let them see where their 20% is and then try to release them. Because if you're doing things you're good at, you're doing things that get effective results with little investment of time and energy and money, your passion rises. And so does your productivity. In tough times, we need to recapture the pioneer spirit, what Edward de Bono called lateral thinking. In tough times, the biggest resource you have as a leader is the 10 billion neurons or switches inside the human brain of everyone that works for you. The best thing you have going for you now is the ability to be divergent. Because the pressure is on you right now to be convergent, to get to the answer quickly. Let's skip through all the options. No more brainstorming. Let's sign the paper. Let's get the deal done now. But divergent thinking is big picture thinking. What some people call blue skies thinking. You're all familiar with that term, I know. But that's not where Einstein lived. He readily admitted that the cornerstone of modern physics, the theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, came to him not when he was poring over the physics books or working with chalk on a blackboard, writing mathematical formulae. It came to him when he was sitting in a darkened room, looking at an open window, watching a beam of light, daydreaming what's it like to ride on a beam of light. And in that moment, he said, I had an illumination. I began to get curious about this idea of relativity. And then he went to the formulae, then he went to the books, then he went to the chalkboard. But it all started here, off the center of the radar, where very few people are operating. In the area of divergent, intuitive. You know, some of our brainstorming sessions are convergent sessions when they should be divergent sessions. You can't have rules in a brainstorming session. It's not brainstorming if there are lots of rules. You can't have people piping up and saying, oh, that's a stupid idea in a brainstorming session. It's supposed to be a little bit stupid. You know, we're coming into the third industrial revolution in the Western world. In the first one, in the 19th century, we swapped farms for factories. In the second one, in the 20th century, we swapped brawn for brain. But in this new emerging third industrial revolution, we are swapping analysis of information for innovation with information. It is no longer how much you know that sets you apart. It's how much you can create using what you know. It's no longer the accruing of information. It's adding value to that information. So this is the time to invest in creatives. I've met CEOs around the world who basically closed down their marketing department because the times are tough. Wrong. This is the time to turn everybody into the marketing department. Let everybody find their creativity. When Steve Jobs was asked back to the Apple Corporation in the mid-90s, it wasn't because he was a great manager. He's not actually. If you talk to those who work for him. It's because he's a symbol of innovation. When Apple was really going down the toilet in terms of market share, and even its own evangelists were losing interest, they called Mr. Jobs back because he is a symbol of creativity. Not just to the shareholder, not just to the consumer, but to those who work in the enterprise, in the business. And if today you have no credibility, in an age of so much data, you take in 34 gigabytes of systematic information every week. You hear, or rather read, 100,000 words a week, not in conversation, on screens, in various forms, systematic. 100,000 words a week. So much information is coming at us. In that age, if there's no creativity, there is no visibility. If there's no visibility, there is no credibility. So not everybody in your team's going to be Steve Jobs, but there are 7 different forms of creativity that psychologists have identified, and that again is a 1-hour session. So let me get right to it and say some of your people are going to be mavens, very creative at gathering information. Feed them information. Let them do the research you need. They'll become walking data banks around the office. When you need to know something, they're the people that will have it. Some of your guys are connectors. They're just really good at bringing the nodes together. Put them on the people interface. They'll make you look good. Some of your people are great sellers. And I don't mean paid salespeople. I mean, they just love talking about an idea. You can't shut them up. They've just got this new magazine about cars and they just can't stop talking about this latest model, whatever. Use that to your advantage. Sell them the vision over and over. Feed it to them over and over again. Allow them to become your creative salespeople. They will make you look good. Lateral requires focus, and that means de-gadgetizing. How many of you use your mobile phone more than an hour a day? Okay. How many of you have more than 3 or 4 screens talking to you in a day? including sat-navs, phones, televisions. Okay, most of us. The good news is you're normal. You were waiting for something else, but you're normal because most of us live that way these days. But to have a really lateral culture, there have got to be times when you de-gadgetize. You know, in the UK today, it takes 11 minutes for a person to get distracted sitting at a computer. You give them a job to do at their terminal, 11 minutes later, on average, they're distracted by something on that screen. For most of them, it takes 30 minutes to reset their focus once that's happened. And 40% will never actually get back to the original job. Now, what does that do to your productivity? So, from time to time, you have to de-gadgetize the environment. Now, it might simply mean buying notebooks for your people and telling them to bring a notebook to the staff meeting instead of a PDA. I mean, a really nice notebook, not a rubbish one, but something that's tactile and, a bit artistic. It might be as simple as setting aside an area in your office. It is a de-gadget space. There's no Inspector Gadget here. You've got to leave your phone outside. You've got to leave your gadgets outside. This is just for coffee and talking time. Now, that may sound like a really stupid idea, but I promise you, I know people who've tried it. It works. To de-gadgetize, to take the screen time away for a little while, helps people be a lot more creative, a lot more lateral. Lateral requires an expansive worldview. That means you as a leader have to keep growing your worldview, your construct of reality. In an age of rapid data flow, a leader with a limited or stagnant worldview has a limited shelf life. So, read people that challenge you. Don't read the same books all the time. Let people challenge your world. An unchallenged worldview is an unprocessed one, and it's no help when it comes to turning ideas into action. Let people disagree with you. Dissent is not the same as disloyalty if it comes from the right place. Allow people to disagree with you because the best ideas are sharpened when they're challenged. Let people rock your boat now and again. Do you have anybody in your team who really seriously rocks your boat? And I know some days you just want to strangle them. You need people like that, at least one on every team. The person who rocks your boat is the last one you should throw overboard. You need them. You need them to challenge your worldview, to enlarge you. Future casting. I'll come back to this in the second session because all of the great global shapers of conversation today are futurists. Not in the limited sense of those who make a living at it, in the much wider sense of those who engage the future now. This young man in the corner, you don't even know him. He was voted late last year, in the Times online poll as the #1 most influential man in the world. He's only in his mid-20s. He started a website on his mother's credit card a few years ago. Until recently, we didn't even know his real name. We only had his screen name, Moot, M-O-O-T. Apparently because he considered his real name to be a moot point when it came to the internet. His real name is Christopher Poole. He started a site that, if you go to it today, it's FourChan.org. It doesn't look any good. There's no flash-driven graphics. It's pretty corny, really. It just allows people to swap stories and videos and information about anime, cartoons, film, and so on. Today it gets 13 million views every day. And he's the #1 most, according to Time, influential man in the online world. Why? Simply because he's engaging the future now. He's trying to meet a need that he foresees that doesn't exist yet. And that's really what the iPhone has done. Anybody here got an iPhone? 5 billion application downloads and counting. 180,000 non-proprietary, that is not owned by Apple applications. Some of them making up to 170,000 Australian dollars a year for the inventor. There's a business to get into. But if you'd done a market survey 5 years before this came out, 2007, you would have found hardly any of those apps represented a perceived human need. People were not saying in 2002 or 3, I really need something on my phone to unlock my car. I really need something on my phone to help me find my way from the car to the restaurant, which is just over there. New technology suggests need. It suggests new perceived need. And really being future-minded, it's not about predicting trends. Anybody can do that. Future-mindedness is about seeing the likely human need emerging in response to those trends. And I'm almost done. We need to have a culture of confidence. Very service-oriented, especially in a time like this. And it begins with service of the team. You know, when the mortgage is a bit shaky and the wage is a little bit iffy, the work contract's, a bit tentative, the thing people value most is their skill, because it's the only real asset they have in a tough time. If you can invest in their skill, in enhancing their skill, you will produce enormous loyalty from people under your leadership. Now, if you're going to have reward incentive programs, make sure they're incentivized. Don't have these everybody gets a prize deals that go on in some primary schools now. It's good that everybody gets a prize as long as they get a prize where they're good. Otherwise, you're just promoting mediocrity. High performers feel deflated, low performers feel justified. Your productivity goes out the window. Define the criteria really carefully. Do you know why we have a high rate of burnout in the corporate world in Australia? Number one reason? Because people have never had success defined for them. They don't know what success looks like when they get there. They know what numbers look like, but that doesn't mean anything in an emotional world. They want to know what success looks like, what it feels like, so when they get there, they can celebrate it and be celebrated for it. So, define the criteria carefully, and the best incentive is always a job worth doing. Client service is not about software and databases, especially in a tough time. If you're relying on CRM software to look after your clients, forget it. It's not going to work. Why? Because you can't digitize relationship. This is the time for personal relationship. Take that client out that's giving you a headache all the time and find out why they do the things they do. Take out that supplier that's always failing to hit the deadline and costing you time and money and really annoying you. Take them out for coffee. I was going to say take them out, but that has mafiosi intonations. Take them out for coffee and find out why it is maybe they do these things. This is the time for the personal touch. Turn those networks into alliances, those customers into clients, those prospects into partners. In other words, make friends of the people who work with you or partner in your endeavor. And finally, it's about community service. In the midst of our worst recession in Britain, as I said, in 60 years, Britain's largest charity, Red Nose Day, where people wear red noses and put red noses on their cars and go away around and do silly, eccentric English things to raise money for children's charities. Last year, Red Nose Day rose the largest amount of money it's ever raised by far. It's counterintuitive. In recession, you shouldn't be raising as much. There's a reason for that. When material security goes down in a community, when people can't define who they are by the size of their wage packet, their stock portfolio, or how many cars are in the driveway, they look for other ways to define themselves and describe their values to the world. So when material security goes down in a community, altruism goes through the roof. If you run a charity today, this is not the time to stop asking people for money. You may get less, but what you do get will have much greater emotional commitment attached. And the emotional commitment is worth, in the end, a whole lot more than the money. In a study we were involved with last year, one of Britain's leading healthcare authorities found that 14 million people had changed their service provider in the midst of the recession. A bank, a utility, a healthcare agency. 14 million out of 69 million had changed in the middle of recession. The two top reasons they'd done this is because they didn't feel there was any mutuality in the relationship. Hey, If you work in a bank or run a bank, remember this, people need to know they have a friend at the bank, not just a manager, especially in the tough times. But they also felt there was no possibility for activism. People don't want to be consumers anymore. They want to be activists. That's why ethical buying is on the rise. That's why people pay at Starbucks to have fair trade coffee. That's why volunteerism is on the rise in most of the Western world. More people are volunteering for the third sector than ever before. Because people want to turn their consumerism into activism. I want to invest in companies that will take something of what I give them and use it for a purpose beyond their own bottom line profits. Sustainability is part of that. It's gone. This guy on the far side, that's what an eco-environmental warrior looked like in 1990. This guy Swampy used to sleep under bridges in London and come out and demonstrate. Here we have the former director, the former chairman of Marks and Spencer. That's what an eco-warrior looks like in 2009. 10 years ago, you could hardly find one MBA course that had a sustainability faculty. Today, there's almost none that don't have a sustainability faculty because we know the global issues have gone local. People want to know. People who work with you want to know. There's some altruistic element. I know. It was Maynard Keynes who said the social responsibility of a company is to make a profit for its shareholders. I know that. No one's expecting you to be Mother Teresa. But the people who are working for you, I think, need this outlet. Do you know BT, the British Telecom people, donate 20,000 work days a year to charity. They allow their workers 20,000 days to invest in different causes in the local community and international NGOs and beyond. What a wonderful thing. Not asking you, as I said, to be Mother Teresa, but just to facilitate, to allow time for people to take part in that kind of volunteer activity, to promote giving to some sort of, maybe you've got a charity in mind that your company could really get behind and isn't yet doing so. Allow vacation schedules sometimes, where possible, to coincide with people volunteering for things. Not always doable, but sometimes it is. Do what you can. And let me finish with a little to-do list, because we're all company leaders and we like to-do lists. Increase the personal touch. In the age of gadgets, de-gadgetize. Increase the personal touch. Brainstorm the future. Think about what's the worst case scenario? What can we do in advance to head that off? Find your 80-20. Find a 20% that brings the 80% effectiveness and spend more time on that. You'll be surprised, I promise you, what it does to your own productivity and the confidence of people around you. Explain the tough decisions and why you've made them. And show that you empathize with those who are affected. And finally, facilitate this idea of social activism. In the next session, I want to talk to you about engaging the millennial generation. And I promise you, I'm going to say some things you've never heard before about this most exciting digital. This is the first digital native generation. We are all immigrants to the digital world. These guys don't just use digital technology, they think digitally. I'm going to show you why that can help you in your enterprise in the next session. Thank you.